At the height of the Great Depression, ironworkers balanced on beams over 1,000 feet above New York, assembling the world's tallest skyscraper without a single safety harness. Every 6 minutes a steel beam arrived, fueling a 410-day race that pushed men and materials to their limits. Why did thousands risk everything? And how did the Empire State Building rise so fast with such deadly stakes? The answer starts where tradition met relentless pressure, and it reveals what was truly sacrificed to conquer the sky. On March 17, 1930, the first shovels hit the ground at 5th Avenue and 34th Street. But the real countdown had started months before. The men in charge, Starrett Brothers and Eakin, were handed a single non-negotiable target: 410 days to finish the tallest building on Earth. This was not just ambition. Every day over schedule risked losing prime tenants, missing the May 1st lease cycle, and watching millions in investment slip away. John J. Raskob, the project's driving force, had already seen the Chrysler Building's spire race skyward across town. He wanted the Empire State to beat every rival, and he wanted it done before the ink dried on the next year's rental contracts. Memos from the executive suite spelled out the stakes: speed. Starrett's leadership responded with a plan that left no room for hesitation: overlapping trades, round-the-clock shifts, and a supply chain tuned to the minute. The building's clock started ticking long before the first steel arrived. From the very start, time was not just money, it was survival. Steel began its journey to Manhattan as raw shapes in the Pittsburgh mills, where thousands of tons were cut, punched, and marked for the Empire State job. Each beam carried a unique code, stamped and logged in ledgers before loading onto Pennsylvania Railroad cars bound for New York. The trip did not pause at the city limits. Freight cars rolled into New Jersey yards, then beams were shifted onto barges to cross the Hudson, or onto trucks for the final city miles. Every handoff followed a strict timetable. At peak, the math was relentless. Nearly 60,000 tons of steel moved east, and the schedule demanded a fresh beam at the site every 6 minutes. In the cramped staging yard at 5th Avenue and 34th, trucks lined up with barely a moment to idle. As soon as one load was off, another took its place. Crews on the ground checked manifests against the day plan, and any delay could ripple up the entire frame. The pressure reached everyone: fabricators in Pittsburgh, railroad switchmen, barge captains, and truck drivers, all tuned to the same pulse. For the ironworkers waiting overhead, the rhythm below meant their next piece of the skeleton would always be ready, no matter how fast the tower climbed. Inside the rising skeleton of the Empire State Building, a miniature railway kept the entire job moving. Crews laid temporary narrow-gauge track, about 3 feet wide, right through the elevator shafts and along open floors, always just a level or two below the highest steelwork. Small electric or compressed air locomotives, built for the tightest corners, pulled flat cars loaded with beams, decking, and bags of concrete. Each day, as new steel went up, carpenters and laborers would pull up the tracks from finished floors and relay them higher so the trains could keep pace with the climb. Material didn't wait in the yard. It rolled straight off the hoist, onto these stubby trains, and out to the edge where ironworkers needed it most. The system ran like clockwork, with scheduling charts pinned to foremen's walls showing which loads went where and when. At peak, several locomotives shuttled back and forth on a shifting web of track, ensuring that every piece of steel, every bundle of decking, made it to the right spot without delay. No outside cranes could match this tempo. The railway inside the tower turned a vertical job site into a moving assembly line, delivering supplies to the crews working at the edge of New York's sky. 4 men, 4 roles, 1 relentless rhythm. This was the heart of steelwork on the Empire State Building. The riveting gang moved as a single practiced unit, each man with a job that had to be executed in perfect sequence. The heater stood over a portable forge, glowing rivets tumbling in the fire until they reached the precise shade of white-hot. Timing was everything. With a practiced flick of the tongs, the heater sent a rivet flying through open air, sometimes across gaps wider than a city street. The catcher, waiting on a narrow beam, had only seconds to snatch that blazing piece of steel, bare hands protected by thick gloves, eyes never leaving the arc of the rivet. He jammed it into a waiting hole where the bucker up braced the tail end with a heavy iron bar, absorbing the shock and holding the rivet steady. Then the riveter pressed a pneumatic gun to the head, unleashing a rapid-fire burst that mushroomed the metal and locked the beams together. Each step had to happen before the rivet cooled and hardened, a window measured in heartbeats. The process repeated hour after hour, floor after floor, the sound of hammers and guns echoing through the skeleton of the tower. There was no room for hesitation. The men balanced on flanges no wider than a boot sole, shifting their weight in time with the gun's staccato rhythm. Instinct, trust, and constant communication kept them alive. Signals were passed with a nod or a shout, hands and voices cutting through the noise and wind. Machinery set the pace, but it was human coordination, refined by years on steel, that made the impossible schedule possible. 1,000 feet above the city, the men who built the Empire State Building relied on little more than nerve and balance, and whatever they could carry in their hands. Modern harnesses and safety nets were nowhere in sight. Instead, hemp ropes were strung between steel columns, sometimes tied off as makeshift barriers, and more often used to steady swinging beams or guide heavy loads. Wooden planks, 2 or 3 planks wide, were laid across open steel to create narrow walkways or platforms, just enough room for a worker's boots and a rivet bucket. These planks were moved and relayed as the job advanced, providing a shifting foothold at the edge of the void. The Mohawk ironworkers, many from the Kanawake Reserve near Montreal, became legends among their peers for their calm at height. Oral histories describe how they learned to walk beams from a young age, their balance honed by generations of bridge and skyscraper work. For them, safety was a matter of experience, trust in their crew, and an almost instinctive sense of where to place each step. They watched each other closely, calling out if someone's footing slipped or if a gust caught a plank loose. The work demanded total focus. One misjudged move and nothing but air stood between a man and the street below. Photographs from the era show men perched on flanges no wider than a hand, tools slung from belts, gripping the cold steel with gloved hands. There were no manuals for this kind of protection, only a blend of tradition, improvisation, and the unspoken rule that you looked out for the man beside you. In the absence of modern safeguards, survival depended on rope, wood, and the shared knowledge of what it took to stay alive in the sky. The men who built the Empire State Building came from all over, including Italy, Ireland, the Mohawk Nation, and neighborhoods across New York. For many, a day's pay on this job meant survival for entire families back home. The official wage hovered around $1.50 an hour, a rare windfall in the depths of the Great Depression, when breadlines stretched for blocks and steady work was almost unheard of. It was enough to keep a roof overhead, enough to send money to parents or children still overseas, or to cover rent on a crowded Lower East Side flat. But every dollar came with a price measured in risk. By the time the building topped out, 5 men had lost their lives to the job. That number stands out, remarkably low for a project of this scale and speed, especially in an era when safety rules were minimal and accidents were often accepted as part of the trade. Yet the danger was everywhere. A dropped wrench could kill just as easily as a misstep. Workers spoke of near misses, beams swinging loose in the wind, boots slipping on icy steel, the sudden lurch of a derrick cable. Coroner files and faded payroll stubs capture only a fraction of the reality. Behind each statistic was a face, a family, a story cut short. Still, men lined up for the chance. Pride played its part. but so did desperation. The Empire State offered more than a paycheck. It promised a way out of poverty, a shot at dignity, and for some, a legacy written in steel. The willingness to face those risks wasn't recklessness. It was calculation, necessity, and a form of hope that rose with every new floor. Steelwork on the Empire State Building moved at a tempo that left no room for hesitation. Foremen tracked every hour, knowing the schedule demanded an average of 4.5 new stories each week. Some days crews watched the skyline change by a full floor before their shift ended. The pressure came down from the top. Every lost minute threatened the entire project, and nobody wanted to be the reason a floor fell behind. Diaries from the site tell of men arriving before dawn, their boots echoing on steel as the sun rose over Manhattan. Shifts overlapped, with one crew bolting up columns while another set decking just a few bays away. The pace was relentless. Rivet gangs worked in a blur. Derricks swung beams into place with barely a pause, and material handlers hustled to keep supplies flowing to the right spot. Hand signals and shouted orders replaced paperwork. There was no time for second-guessing. The internal schedule was pinned to walls and memorized by heart. Each man knew exactly how many pieces had to be set by lunch and how many more before quitting time. The tempo wasn't just a number on a chart, it was the rhythm of survival. Every worker felt the clock ticking, every action driven by the knowledge that the building's success and their own safety depended on never falling behind. High above Manhattan, the real muscle behind the Empire State's dizzying pace wasn't just the men on the beams. It was the machines swinging steel into place. Steam-powered derricks anchored to the rising skeleton hoisted multi-ton beams from street level to the clouds. Each derrick was a simple but powerful rig, a pivoting mast, steel cables, and a roaring boiler below, all designed to lift loads that could weigh upwards of 10 tons. Operators worked from cramped platforms, their hands on levers and feet braced against steel, eyes fixed on the iron hook as it dipped and rose. Every move had to be precise. A missed signal or a slack cable could mean a twisted beam, or worse, a swinging hazard in the wind. Capacity charts taped to the derrick bases spelled out the limits, how much weight could be lifted at each angle, how far the boom could reach before the whole system risked tipping. Riggers and signalmen communicated with a shorthand of whistles and arm waves, guiding each beam from the ground to the waiting ironworkers above. The derricks worked in rotation, leapfrogging up the tower as new floors took shape, their cables creaking under the strain. This was mechanical choreography on a massive scale, raw power harnessed by experience, where every lift counted and every mistake had consequences. The machines could muscle steel skyward, but it was human judgment that kept the dance from turning deadly. Wind barreled down the unfinished corridors, sometimes strong enough to rattle tools or send a plank skittering toward the edge. On cold mornings, frost glazed the steel, turning every step into a test of balance. Crews learned to read the sky and the shifting moods of weather, but the schedule rarely slowed. When fog rolled in from the river, visibility shrank to a few feet, yet the work pressed on. Iron workers called out through the mist, voices echoing between the columns, relying on memory and instinct to find their marks. Rain slicked the beams and winter storms iced the walkways, but the building never paused. Steam from the hoists mingled with breath in the frigid air as workers hauled loads, sometimes blinded by sleet, always one misstep from disaster. A dropped wrench or a swinging beam could vanish into the clouds below. Every day, hundreds of carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and masons stacked their labor across dozens of floors. Schedules overlapped while steel gangs bolted beams above. Finishers installed pipes and wires below, with only chalk marks and shouted warnings to keep order. No radios, no computers, just the relentless drive to keep 7 million man-hours in motion, every trade trusting the others to hold the line. Nature and complexity threatened progress at every turn, But the building rose anyway, one floor at a time, against the elements and the odds. The final beam rose slow and steady, dangling from a derrick cable as ironworkers steadied it with taglines. At 1,250 feet above the city, the crew guided the steel into place, boots balanced on flanges barely wider than a hand. The wind whipped at their jackets, but hands stayed sure as bolts slipped through the last holes. With practiced ease, the team drove the ceremonial rivet, a glint of gold in the sun, locking the skeleton's crown into place. An American flag and a small evergreen were lashed to the beam, fluttering high above Manhattan. This was more than tradition. It was a silent promise for good luck and safe return. For a moment, the city paused to watch as the world's tallest building claimed its place in the sky, held together by human hands and the courage to finish the climb. Newspapers across the country splashed headlines above the fold. Empire State Building tops the world, New York's crown in the clouds. Crowds gathered on Fifth Avenue, necks craned, watching the final beam rise. The city's radio stations buzzed with updates, describing the spectacle as a triumph of American grit. Editorials called it a beacon of hope in a year when breadlines still curled around city blocks. Reporters marveled at the speed, the nerve, and the sheer audacity of building so high, so fast, with so little to shield the men from harm. Letters to the editor poured in, some from workers' families, others from strangers moved by the sight of the flag and the evergreen waving at 1,250 feet. The Empire State became more than a building. It was a symbol of courage and coordination, a moment when New York could reach for the sky and make the world stop to applaud. Today, every skyscraper rises under strict safety laws, yet the city's skyline still depends on the courage and coordination of workers who risk their lives above the streets. The Empire State story reminds us, progress is built on invisible hands, and safety is never finished work. Our ambition remains sky high, and so must our respect for those who make it possible. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.